Welcome to the February 2023 edition of Hunt Camp Mail. I hope you and your significant other had a memorable love connection this Valentine's Day. I know me and Becca did. My boss shot shell video ruffled some feathers, and some things were said in the comment section of that video that I just had to delete. So please keep the drama off my channel. Create your own channel if you crave drama and want to make threats on the internet. Just don't do it on mine. And I'll discuss those Baja shot shells a little bit more at the end of this video. I really enjoyed making that Puma White Hunter knife video. I wanted to do a video like that for a long time. And in retrospect, I just love that video, the way it turned out. I know it didn't get a ton of views, but that's a video I really like doing. And I'll try to integrate a little more knife-related material into my content going into the future for you. Well, once again, I received a lot of mail this month, most of which I had to answer privately. But on a positive note, I don't think we'll be seeing the old bullshit button this month at all. So let's get to February's mail. And our first question is from Lee in North Dakota. Lee wrote, "Curious if you would be so kind as to share more information about your experience with fire lapping, a la tub final finish bullets. I bought the final finish bullets to remove the drilling and reaming marks, evidenced with the bore scope, on a few low round count 1950s to 1970s Remington hunting rifles that were handed down to me. However, I'm reluctant to pull the trigger on the fire lapping system. I'm hoping that the fire lapping would smooth and uniform the bores without doing damage to the barrel. Curious how you implemented fire lapping and your first-hand and perhaps second-hand accounts." Yeah, sure, I can answer this. I actually do have experience with the tub system, but without rambling on too long with details about this, I'll tell you that I really had mixed results with this system. First of all, I kind of consider fire lapping as being the last resort to kind of save a barrel. If I'm really trying to keep a barrel, to keep it original, maybe it's a collector rifle, I might try fire lapping. But of course, with some barrels, fire lapping has actually made groups worse for me. So fire lapping your barrel is actually a riskier proposition than tubs would lead you to believe. The ones that really seemed to benefit from the fire lapping with the tub system, were the really cheap, brand new Remington 700s in the 1990s and early 2000s, especially models like the SPS. And those Remington 700s just came from the factory with really rough barrels. Basically, those barrels on those 700s were so trashy from the factory that fire lapping would almost always improve them. But in retrospect, if polishing a bore with an aggressive bore paste like Flitz doesn't work, it's probably time for a rebore or a rebarrel, in my opinion. And our next question is from Ken from Kansas. Ken wrote, "In one of your videos not long ago, you mentioned that you have a 505 Gibbs. I also have one. Mine is a CZ. So is mine. I love the capability of the cartridge. I had planned to take it on my first buffalo hunt, but decided to take my 450 Rigby instead. Probably a good choice. I was just curious what your thoughts were on your rifle and the cartridge. I'd also like to know, when you load yours, do you load it to factory specs or do you increase them? I use factory matched loads for practice, but someday I hope to take it on an elephant hunt. If I do, I plan to use hotter loads. I was thinking 600 grain Woodleys pushed to 2,600 feet per second should be a fantastic load for this." Whew. Man. Shooting a 600 grain bullet at 2,600 feet per second will not be for the faint of heart. Be very careful with that load. Extreme recoil numbers like that can easily cause a concussion, traumatic brain injury, or what they call TBI, a possibly detached retina or eye issues, neck or rotator cuff issues, and tissue damage to your shoulder. Not to mention, you'll be playing at the edge of overpressure with a very powerful cartridge. I mean, powerful enough to probably kill you if a case ruptures. In my Gibbs, about a 525 grain bullet going about 2350 feet per second is basically the limit for practicality with my gun, I think. So there's no way in hell I'd shoot a 600 grainer at 2600 feet per second. And I don't think there's any valid or logical reason to do that. Just because some Yahoo on the internet, on an internet forum that you looked at, shoots a 600 grain bullet at 2600 feet per second, doesn't really make it a good idea. And our next question is from Marcus from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Marcus wrote, I've been a lifelong hunter, but I'm just now getting into fly fishing in my late 50s. Since you're an avid hunter and fly fisherman, which seems to be a rare combination, I have a question for you. It seems as though most fly fishermen have liberal leanings, which is very odd coming from a hunting and bass fishing background where 99% of people are conservatives. Why do so many liberals fly fish? It's actually a common question I get from people wanting to get into fly fishing, particularly from a hunting background. But I'd say that about 30% of fly anglers are probably liberal or left-leaning. Another 30% are probably on the extreme right. And I'd say that at least 40% of the fly fishing population is politically independent. And I'll just kind of postulate on why I think so many liberals fly fish. I mean, compared to hunting, I think liberals are probably drawn to fly fishing because it doesn't involve a gun or killing. I mean, it's a pursuit where they can enjoy the outdoors and the challenge and primal desire to hunt without sacrificing the principles of their liberal ideology. Many liberals also like to feel that what they do is superior to what other people do. And fly fishing does seem to have that arrogance about it. And I could see that attracting a lot of liberals. But let me explain why most fly fishermen are probably politically independent. It's because both political parties support habitat loss and are really on the wrong side of water issues. Basically, both political parties are the enemy of healthy wildlife, especially when it comes to fish. We watch Republican senators and politicians, oppose clean water legislation and wetland preservation, and it pisses us off. Then we watch Democrats close public land, access to public land, to save wildlife. Then we watch the same Democrats have that land plowed down and graded to build solar farms and dams and low-income housing. So, look at what they're doing in California. So both political parties are really beholden to special interests. And this is why fly anglers are usually politically independent. And I have to say, if you're honest with yourself, you probably lean that way too. Another thing that you'll notice is that the fly fishing community in general kind of has an unwritten code about injecting politics into the hobby. You might be used to conversing with groups of hunters where the conversation's just going to ultimately regress into how much you hate Biden or what you plan to do when them pesky Democrats come for your guns. But in general, that kind of stuff is left out of fly fishing. Fly fishermen tend to talk about issues related to fly fishing, conservation, and beer. Fly fishermen love beer. Instead of just, focusing on politics as a conversation starter, like you'll find in your typical hunting camp. Of course, there are exceptions to this, and some extremists just can't help themselves no matter what hobby they're in. Like that piece of crap leftist guide in Montana that yelled at Tucker Carlson in that fly shop when he was in there with his daughter, which is just, he's a horrible human being. But rabid liberals like that are honestly more the exception than the rule. But, fly fishing is a different culture, but I'd say give it a chance. It's actually refreshing to talk to other human beings without politics being involved. I mean, you might like it. And our next question is from Oleg from San Francisco. Oleg wrote, for turkey hunting, can you recommend decoys and a call for a beginner to use here in California? That's a good question and appropriate for this time of year too, as we get ready for turkey season. I highly, and I mean highly, recommend the Avian X breeder hen decoy. I just love Avian X decoys. They're pretty much the most realistic decoys I think I've ever seen. And they're also collapsible and inflatable, so you could put a couple of these in the back of your turkey vest when you hike out to your spot. And they really work. For calls, a simple box call is the easiest for a beginner. But I'd say once you learn how to do a pot call, need to scratch that lens a little bit, but once you learn to use a pot call, that's probably what you're going to use most of the time. But in the end, learning to use a mouth call will be a game changer, especially if you solo hunt. I'm a little rusty right now. I actually haven't used a mouth call in a year, so I better get to practicing before the season opener here in a few weeks. But your first mouth call should be a single or double reed call like the classic hen. Then you can move up to an intermediate call, kind of like the Hook's Ghost Cut. That's what this is right here, to produce more sounds. But stay away from the 3 and 4 reed calls until you master the double reed call first. And our next question is from Matthew in Texas. Matthew wrote, I was watching another YouTuber, The Real Gunsmith. I like his channel. And he was talking about rifle primers, particularly the Winchester large rifle magnum primers. He was saying the large rifle magnum primer is too hot for the standard length magnums like the 264 Win, 7 Rem Mag, and 300 Win Mag. Those larger rifle magnum primers should only be used on the ultra magnum cases and Weatherby magnums. Is there truth to this? I don't know. To be honest with you, I haven't seen that episode where he discussed that. But I'll admit I'd never used Winchester primers. I haven't in, recent memory at least, used those primers. I only use CCI and Federal at the moment. But I've always used Magnum primers with my 7 and 300 mag loads. I get match grade accuracy, low extreme spreads, and safe pressures with those primers. The 7mm and 300 Magnums use slower burning powders, and they're considered, overbore. The case volume to bore area ratio of those particular Magnums will always favor slower powders. And large volumes of hard to ignite, slow burning powders just benefit from a hotter Magnum primer, in my opinion. Even in non-Magnum cartridges, a lot of ball powders are harder to ignite and benefit from a hotter Magnum primer. For instance, when I use ball powders in my 223 loads or my 223 AI loads, I always use a Magnum primer for that. But your letter in particular mentioned Winchester Magnum primers, and I just don't use Winchester primers because I've always found them to be very inconsistent from batch to batch, where the Federal and CCI primers have always been extremely consistent for me. I personally believe that CCI and Federal make a higher quality primer, so that's what I use most of the time. And I do utilize the Magnum CCI and federal primers. But on another note, I have heard the rumor that Winchester large rifle magnum primers are very hot. So perhaps he was specifically talking about those Winchester primers only. Unfortunately, I can't give you any data on the Winchester primers, but like I said before, I will emphatically state that CCI and federal magnum primers are perfectly suited for magnum cartridges that use large volumes of slow burning powder. Our next question is from Al Azadi. Al Azadi wrote, if you need 2,100 foot-pounds of energy for Grizzly, then can you use a 168 grain TTSX or a 160 grain Hornady CX at a distance where your projectile has 2,100 foot-pounds of energy? Whew, boy. I'm not going to use the bullshit button on this, El Azadi, because I know this is an honest question and you're just curious, but I don't know where you got the information that a bullet delivering 2,100 foot-pounds of energy is great for grizzlies. But it sounds like something an internet commando would post from his mom's basement or something. Like with any animal, a properly placed shot with anything might kill a grizzly. In Alaska, I know for a fact that grizzlies have been killed with 38 special revolvers that police were using. And, you know, a grizzly bear was even killed with a buck 110 folding knife before. But that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. You know, I was afraid when I posted that killing power video because I knew people were going to misinterpret what I was saying in it. Internet commandos always throw out their little anecdote about Bell killing elephants with a 7mm Mauser, you know, and they use that as a means to justify using weak cartridges on big, nasty animals. But please don't follow that logic. Grizzlies are more than just large, tough animals. They're also killers of men. So they have to be stopped as fast as possible with as much power as you could put on them within reason. Bears are also designed really weird, and that thick fur and loose skin causes the vitals to just shift all over the place in relation to the bear's position. So a perfect shot is also very difficult on a bear, and you really want that margin of error. People who are serious about brown bears, about hunting brown bears, will always stack the odds in their favor as much as they can. And a 160 grain bullet has no place on a grizzly hunt. And our next question is from Chris. Chris wrote, I watched one of your videos on fishing in Baja. It looked like fun, so I decided to go myself. Keep the videos coming. Well, thank you for the letter, Chris. And here's a picture of Chris with the Dorado that he caught. And I want to congratulate you, Chris, on a successful trip down to southern Baja. And I'm really glad that I personally inspired you to take a fishing trip down there. And hopefully it won't be your last. Our next question is from Brent from Utah. Brent wrote, would very much like to hear how you're getting along currently with your Benelli 828 used shotgun, and if your previous opinions of the gun have changed since you got it back from being repaired. My reason for asking is, I'm considering making a purchase on one, but I'm leery due to the challenges others have had. Well, Brent, after 2 trips back to Benelli for repairs, it's actually been a great shotgun. I used it on and off throughout the entire upland season, and it actually performed great. It's just a fantastic lightweight shotgun for upland hunting, and you can adjust it to fit better than any other over and under ever will. But one season of good performance doesn't necessarily erase two previous seasons with quality issues. So ask me again in a few more years. And our next question is from Vernon in San Diego, California. Vernon wrote, I love your channel, but I was a little offended by your last hunt camp mail when you belittled American hunters by saying that many Americans just buy a gun and go hunting without practicing or learning how to use it. Everyone has training before being allowed to have a hunting license. So I do not think your statement was accurate. Well, that's a fair statement, Vernon. But I'd just like to say that perception is in the knowledge of the individual making the comment, and my perception is obviously much different than yours. What you forget about me is that I run various media platforms for hunting. So I get a lot of correspondence every day from hunters. And I'm also an NRA certified instructor, and I've taught thousands of people to safely and effectively use firearms throughout the years. So my opinion draws from a great deal of interaction from a wide sampling of our hunting community. And I can honestly say that about a quarter of the hunters I see and interact with could use more training, particularly when it comes to muzzle discipline, zeroing or patterning a gun and being accurate with it, ethics, and local game laws. Most game wardens you speak to would also 100% agree with me. I thought about your letter when this guy commented on one of my videos. This guy obviously went to a gun store, bought a rifle with a scope on it, and went hunting without zeroing his rifle. I get comments like this on my YouTube channel all the time. I mean, every week. So it's a very common thing. And here's a dirty little secret, Vernon. Most hunters out there today haven't even taken a hunter education course. And by your statement, I could tell you're a pretty new hunter. Most states have either a cutoff age based on birth date, usually, in the 1970s or 1980s, or they grandfathered in older hunting licenses without requiring you to take a course ever. In most states, I wouldn't even be required to take a hunter's education course at all. And, I see you're in California, so consider this. Since COVID, California moved all of its classes to an easy online format with absolutely no personal instruction. And I'd say that many of the hunting courses being completed right now, especially for children or wives, are being done by someone other than the person getting the hunting license. I mean, I'll say I know this for a fact that it's going on. So moving away from personal instruction, in my opinion, is severely diminishing the quality of training that new hunters are receiving right now. So I stand by my statement, Vernon. And our next question is from Nathan from Denver, Colorado. Nathan wrote, your Puma White Hunter video was fascinating. I wonder why the bushcraft community hasn't caught on to that design. Do you do any bushcrafting? Perhaps you can do a video on bushcraft knives. Well, Nathan, I was planning on doing a Mora knife video in the context of hunting, but there definitely wouldn't be any bushcrafting material in it. After I posted my knife video, the usual YouTube channels out there kind of copied me and did knife videos of their own. So I kind of lost interest in that Mora knife video, but I might return to it later. But to answer your question, the modern iteration and culture of bushcrafting is actually pretty annoying to me. In the past, it was known as survival training, and it was very practical and treated in a serious manner. Back then, there were no cool bushcraft knives, made out of these expensive super steels back then. In fact, You usually took these survival courses without any knife at all, and you learned to make your own primitive knives and cutting tools. Uh, I've been to places where people live the real bushcraft life, every day. Think about people eking out a living in Central Africa or the Amazon basin. The game people play in the woods these days called bushcraft is nothing more than a fantasy that people live out as a hobby. I mean, I'm not saying bushcrafting is a bad thing, because at the very least it gets these couch potatoes out of the house and out enjoying nature, and to some degree, some of these people might fall in love with nature and become hunters themselves, which is an overall net benefit in my opinion. But I think I just don't sync with those type of people. They worship guys on YouTube who baton wood and make shavings from sticks in their backyard. And they're often facsimiles of their imagined selves for recognition on social or acceptance on social media. Unfortunately, hunting and fishing have taken a similar media driven path to an artificial reality. But I know people like the whole bushcraft fad, but it's just not my thing, honestly. And our next question is from James from Wisconsin. James asked, what are your thoughts on recoil pads? Limb Saver slip-on pad versus Limb Saver grindable versus Falcon Strike. I think I've answered a couple of questions similar to this in past hunt camp mails, but I'll go ahead and hash it out again here for you, James. I'm just not a fan of slip-on recoil pads, but I'll admit they are handy for collectible firearms if you want to keep them original. And I have a lot of guns, especially my old vintage military rifles that have the metal butt plates where I'll put a slip-on recoil pad on them. But the Limb Saver grind to fit pads are a definite winner and something I install on a lot of my guns. I also have some experience installing several Falcon Strike recoil pads on shotguns, usually on youth guns or guns for people's wives or small statured people. The Falcon Strike recoil pad is actually awesome in my opinion and takes at least half the bite out of your standard turkey gun. But they do add a lot of length to it, so you might have to cut down your stock to maintain proper fit. But I think one of the most important parts of your question is what you didn't let us know. You never mentioned what shotgun you have, which is actually very important. Soft recoil pads, like the Limb Saver pad we like, and hydraulic recoil pads like that Falcon Strike often make inertia shotguns malfunction. I've seen Benellis that would just malfunction over and over with a Limb Saver pad installed. Also, be careful with over and unders that have inertia triggers on them. I have a friend who installed a Falcon Strike pad on his wife's Browning Satori for hunting, and it had constant fails to fire on the second barrel with dove loads because that recoil pad really didn't let that inertia trigger work right. And our next letter is from Anthony from Cape Coral, Florida. I love that place. Anthony wrote, this channel is more hunting focused, and I felt like your old channel was more fishing focused. I miss that old content where you fished all over the world, especially in my home state of Florida. I feel like much of your fishing expertise is lost on this channel. I know you fished from tropical jungles to the Arctic Circle and everything in between. I got in a debate with my boss about what the hardest fighting fish in the world is, pound for pound. My boss thinks it's the yellowfin tuna, and I think it's the Jack Crevalle. What do you think? I honestly think that your pound for pound criteria is a good one. Tell shark will. I know. So you almost have to disregard size when you're debating this issue, which I've debated many times. Everyone thinks that their local fish is the best fighter. Doesn't matter where you go. Guys in the north might say muskie and smallmouth are the hardest fighting fish pound for pound. But in my mind, those fish aren't even close, and in fact, no freshwater fish is at all, in my opinion. I was told by a lot of people that the tiger fish of Africa is the hardest fighting fish in the world, pound for pound. And I mean, just look at them. They certainly look like they might be. But I caught a huge one several months ago on light tackle. And I have to say, it's not even in the top 10 hardest fighting fish, in my opinion. Even fish like salmon, steelhead, and stripers are pussycats compared to tunas and jacks. Those deep dwelling jacks like yellowtail and amberjack are an absolute handful. And even the inshore jacks like roosterfish and permit are really tough fighters. The tunas in particular are extremely powerful and have that instinct to use the water as leverage against you while you're trying to reel them in. So even a little 5-pound tuna fights really hard. But you also have to consider that you're fighting water pressure when you fight fish that are that deep in the ocean. So those fish can't get all the credit. I'd say that open ocean fish are kind of misleading on their fight because the water pressure is a big part of the difficulty when reeling them in. Some other fish of note here, false albies fight really hard for their size, and bluefish do too. And GTs, man, GTs will just rock your world, but you also have to consider their large size. But like you alluded to, the lowly Jack Crevalle, or Jack Crevalle to you Alabama boys out there, the Jack Crevalle is also a really hard fighter that just never gives up or lowers its intensity all the way to the boat. The Jack Crevalle certainly fights harder than any salmon or tarpon or striped bass of equal size ever will. Calling them the hardest fighting fish pound for pound is pretty fair in my estimation. Then we have the groupers, snappers, wrasses, and deep sea bass that hit like a freight train on that first strike. But when you finally pull them off the bottom, it's just like reeling in a sack of rocks. I mean, some of them even help you out by floating up a little bit for you. But pound for pound, nothing surprises me like a bonefish. Hear me out on this. You never really know how big a bonefish is until it's close and you get eyes on it. I mean, seriously, because they fight just so damn hard for their size. I've caught a lot of 5-pound yellowtail, 5-pound tuna, 5-pound trevally, salmon, stripers, bass, and dorado. And a 5-pound bonefish just whoops them all, in my opinion. On my fly rod, I can easily strip in a 5-pound salmon or striper with an 8-weight fly rod without even using my reel. But a 5-pound bonefish will always perform multiple real screaming runs with that same rod setup. Imagine if bonefish grew to 100 pounds. I mean, we wouldn't even be having this argument. I honestly think that if you were to tie a 10-pound bonefish to any other 10-pound fish, the bonefish would actually pull it. Even with its small size, bonefish could swim, over 40 miles an hour, turn on a dime, and give you an epic fight in only 6 inches of water. So the lowly and unassuming bonefish gets my pound for pound vote. Most bonefish are only 1 or 2 pounds, and people use 8-weight fly rods and 15-pound tippet to catch them. So that should tell you something. Also, considering your letter, I'll start posting more fishing content like I used to and kind of see if there's a reaction to it or it gets views, but I don't have high hopes for that. And our next question is from Dan in New Mexico. Dan wrote, I have a pre-64 Winchester in 30-06 that is low on the collector's list due to the previous owner's modification of the bolt to provide better scope clearance. I'm thinking about having it rebarreled in 35 Whelen, or should I look for a less valuable donor rifle like the one you found at a gun show? I mean, it's your choice, Dan. You can do it either way. But in my opinion, since the collector value of your pre-64 Model 70 was basically ruined because the bolt was bubbaed, I'd definitely use that as a donor action for your 35 Whelen build. A pre-64 Model 70 chambered in 35 Whelen is a dream come true to most guys, so I wouldn't hesitate to do it. And our last question is from Sam in Mesa, Arizona. Sam wrote, it seems like the Forest Service and hunting bloggers are constantly going back and forth over bear spray versus handguns for bear defense. Which one is right and why? Once again, I think I answered something similar to this in a couple of past hunt camp mails, but I'll go ahead and rehash it. And I like the way you worded that question too, because it seems that government agencies are always trying to manipulate data to make bear spray seem more effective than it is. Probably to convince people not to carry guns in national forests and national parks. But the gun lobby also manipulates the same data to fit their narrative that handguns are more effective. And they probably do this to promote open carry on public land. But honestly, I'm being honest with myself and you, both sides have their own agendas in this argument. The reality is that they're both effective methods of preventing injury from a bear attack. Statistically, they both work, but I don't have to kill or wound a bear with spray or deal with the legal aftermath of doing it. Bear spray is also lighter and easier to carry. So in that regard, bear spray just makes a lot of sense. I've never personally seen anyone shoot a brown bear with a handgun. And most of the people who tell stories about it just aren't very credible, in my opinion. But I have seen spray in action. Hell, I mean, all the guides that take thousands of tourists bear viewing in Alaska every year spray bears all the time, and they claim that it works 100%. But also understand that there's a big difference between photo tourists and hikers encountering bears and hunters stalking through the backcountry encountering bears. Tourists usually deal with curious bears that are fully aware of their presence and, maybe see or smell something they want to check out on the tourist. Some bears might also be giving the tourist a warning to stay back, kind of being territorial in nature. In contrast to that, hunters are usually stalking silently through the woods with the wind in our face, so our prey won't detect us. Unfortunately, when hunters encounter bears, it's usually a surprise encounter. And the bear is either instinctively gonna instantly run or fight, one of the two. And this is a much more dangerous situation for the hunter. Also, if we're lucky as hunters, we'll be processing a game animal and packing out some meat. Hunting season is at the same time of year where most bears are desperately trying to pack on weight for the winter. And they might choose to challenge you for your game meat. And this is also a very dangerous situation. So hunters in hunting poses a much bigger risk of a bear attack. But think about this. You'll be carrying a powerful rifle with you while you're hunting. And that's going to be better bear defense than any handgun you can carry. But, there's some scenarios you need to consider. Maybe you have your rifle strapped to your pack. while you're hiking through some difficult terrain, or maybe you're busy quartering out an elk or a caribou and you don't have your rifle handy. It's those situations that make me think really hard about carrying a sidearm on me. So I'd say the choice between carrying a handgun and bear spray is going to be personal and situational. And you can always carry both if you want. Statistically, spray is just as effective as a sidearm, possibly even more effective. And spray doesn't harm the bear, and it's really easy to carry. But you can't kill a bear with bear spray. So you better hope that the spray works. Well, that's it for this month's mail. I hope you enjoyed February's Hunt Camp mail, and here's some memes for February. And I know, most of you stuck around to the end of this video or fast forwarded to the end of this video so you can hear what all the drama about Bosch shot shells, you can hear what it's about. I basically want to make my viewers aware of private messages I received from a viewer and from two other YouTubers. Basically, they warned me that Bosch shot shells might threaten me with litigation for making negative reviews of their product. According to them, Bosch likes to send out cease and desist letters to people who give them negative reviews on the internet, and generally make threats about the consequences of negatively reviewing their products. I was sent a link to a Blue Collar Outdoors video about Bosch coming after him after he made a video testing out their turkey loads. He was visibly upset about how Bosch handled it, but in the end, he did end up giving in to their demands. But I assure you, I do not roll over for threats like that. I have the resources to fight frivolous litigation like that and come out on top. I'm also protected by anti-SLAPP laws, the Consumer Review Fairness Act of 2016, and the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. On my old YouTube channel, I actually had an optics manufacturer send me a cease and desist letter after I gave their scope a bad review. And, I pretty much wiped my ass with it because a cease and desist letter is not a legally binding document and is not enforceable. I'm just not intimidated by those things. But I must state emphatically that I haven't received any threats or cease and desist letters from Boss. And I don't expect to, because I reviewed their product in an honest and fair manner. At this point, I've had nothing but a positive experience and great customer service from Boss. And I was also quick to point that out in that video. So that's the story with Boss. People went crazy. I've also been getting emails from a lot of viewers out there demanding that I make a long list of videos that they want to see. And just to let you guys know, I try not to do videos on subjects or cartridges that I'm just not intimately familiar with. You know, I also don't do videos on things I'm not interested in. So I really don't make videos on request. So don't get mad if I disregard your letter with a huge request list on it. Not going to happen. Well, I also want to get into turkey season, and I hope everybody's ready for this turkey season. I think it's going to be a good one, unlike last year when the turkeys were a little bit behind schedule. I know I can't wait for it. I saw a lot of gobblers this summer and winter when we're not allowed to shoot them, and I hope they stick around until I start calling them in. Check out this video from a couple months ago. Look at this. They all just flew down from this roost. There's about 20, 30 turkeys on this side of the road. And then on this side of the road up here, there's about 20 more turkeys.
Stop by the gate. I want to see them cross.
There's a jake right there and a hen. Over on this side, oh, there's a couple of big toms in there with beards dragging. I'm also headed to Hawaii to try my luck on some of the biggest, baddest, and hardest to catch bonefish on the planet. And I might do a video on that if I feel up to it. You can always follow me by hitting me on my Insta at Desert Dog Hunting. You can also reach me with any questions or comments at desertdogoutdoors@gmail.com. Thank you for watching, and as always, good hunting.